Okay, so I have with me today Marta Rose, and she is the founder of Divergent Design Studios and has had a lot of different communications, different social media communications, and has established a very active and very powerful and engaged set of folks around the idea of, I think originally your title was Neurodivergent Emergent, and now you've gone to Design Studios. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started, how all that kind of came together, and kind of what you're doing now.
Okay. So it all sort of happened, by accident, actually. I mean, with a little bit of intention, but a lot by accident. I was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 51, which is about 5 years ago now. And at the same time, I was going through a really messy divorce. Um, and started posting on Instagram about ADHD and sort of discovered a community there of people who were posting about ADHD, which was fantastic. Um, and then I had this idea, then I started making these connections between neurodivergence and creativity, because I'm also an artist,
Mm,
an emerging artist, not by training, but just sort of by vocation.
right.
And so I, so I started making these connections, and I kind of had this idea that, oh, maybe I could create some sort of a business around supporting neurodivergent artists. But that turned out to be harder than I hoped it would be. And at the same time, I was becoming really passionate about some sort of critical ideas that I have about the ways that we think about neurodivergence, which I now include ADHD, autism, and a number of other conditions. So I sort of started to think of it more as a liberation movement. I sort of stopped thinking of it as a business and started thinking of it as a liberation movement. And I have a lot of history and various kinds of social justice movements throughout my life. So it was really exciting. And so I was really motivated to post a lot and to post these ideas that I was having. And people kind of responded to that on Instagram, and my work really resonated with a lot of people. So I kind of built up a bit of a following, and then people started coming to me and saying, "Hey, do you do coaching?" And that wasn't really what I was thinking of around specifically ADHD. But I was like, I guess, sure. So I started doing some coaching on the side, and then I um, offered some small group programs that seemed to be really helpful for people. But the bulk of my work is around sort of a critical analysis of the ways that we think about neurodivergence in the world, and also the intersection between neurodivergence and creativity, because I'm really interested in that
Yeah.
connection.
So can you maybe talk a little bit about that? I mean, that kind of intersection I think is really interesting because, as I was doing a lot of research to pull my group together, which kind of addresses some of the same things. I never was truly diagnosed with ADHD, but my son truly has ADHD. My whole family, now we say has ADHD, and I'm kind of liking the idea not has ADHD but is an ADHD person,
Yes.
because I think that, when we were younger, it was just, those are kind of the weird people over there.
Right.
And then it eventually, you started realizing, hey, how come some people can do this stuff easily that I can't do, and
Yeah.
stuff that I do easily they can't do? And you start to kind of understand, oh, here's a label for that. And then I think as society got a little bit tighter and tighter, more and more people were getting these diagnoses because it was harder and harder for them to move forward. And then it started being like, well, yeah, but they have all these personality traits like creative people. So
Right.
there seemed to be this kind of thing going on where, on the one hand, we were honoring creativity, and on the other hand, we're sort of dismissing the very things that a creative person is. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think that you've hit the nail right on the head in terms of sort of my own perspective about ADHD, autism, all kinds of what I like to call non-normative neurotypes.
Right.
We talk about neurotypicality and neurodivergence, and there's lots of conditions under the umbrella of neurodivergence, but sort of the mainstream way of thinking of neurodivergence is that it's some sort of a disorder. In fact,
Right.
most of those labels have the word disorder in them. You know, autism
Mhm.
spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Right.
But the way I think about it, and the way more and more people in the communities are thinking about it, is that this is just a difference. It's not a disorder.
Mhm.
It is a difference that makes things hard for us in the world,
Mhm.
right? Which looks like deficit, looks like disorder. Um, but but in terms of creativity, I really do think that I mean I'm speaking here in broad generalizations, and obviously there's creative people with all sorts of neurotypes.
Right.
But I think on the whole, neurodivergent people are often more creative types,
Mhm.
artists, designers, engineers, and sort of my working theory of neurodivergence is generally um, that we just have sort of we have more and more um, sensitive antenna that we
Mhm.
take in the whole sensory field all the
Yeah.
time, all at once, right?
Right.
Which can be really disabling, can be really
Yeah.
debilitating in some ways. But it also means that we sort of see the whole picture all at once and we make connections that other people don't see, like between
Right.
seemingly really disparate things. And that to me is a lot of what creativity is. It's like connection, is making connections, seeing things that other people don't see, thinking outside the box. Um, so yeah, so I do think that so many of us who are neurodivergent are also really creative people
Mhm.
that come naturally to the arts and design. And what's interesting to me, because I haven't done a ton of research in either field, but I've done a little bit of research both in the literature on creativity and the literature on neurodivergence. And what's interesting is that so much of what we look at as deficit in the world of neurodivergence is actually seen as a positive attribute in the world of creativity. It's like they're doing the same research almost, but coming to completely different conclusions.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Well,
those
and
are
I
skills that I really want to see coming together more and more.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the deficit comes from the need to find work, to make money, all the things that a society has set up as being the way in which you get, you know, uh, rewarded, I guess,
Right.
for your contribution. And as that becomes harder and harder to make money, we'll say, on those kinds of things, I think it just uh, becomes this bigger problem because
Yeah.
there used to, I feel like there, at some point there was a little more room
Yeah.
for these uh, mind types.
Yeah.
And it's just maybe getting a little more squeezed now so that we're seeing them, kind of come to the surface as, I can't pay my bills. I can't do this, that, and the other thing. And I think you did a lot of work on time, the relationship between time. I know most ADHD people I know, struggle to get a linear sense of time.
Yeah.
And I know you talk about it being a spiral. And I think there is a relationship between that and the creative
Yeah.
kind of mind.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, if you look at the world of work, the institution of work, right?
Right.
And not just work, but education, which is modeled. The education system is very much modeled on an industrial
Right.
model of work, right?
Right.
Schools are intentionally designed to look like factories so that they can produce good factory workers. I mean,
Mhm.
that's just history. Like
That's history, right?
Very few people dispute that.
Right.
It's still true, right? And neurodivergent people are just not good factory workers. They're not
Right.
good at like clicking in at a certain time and doing the same thing over and over and over
Right.
again with intense, concentrated focus, and then checking out and going on our merry way. Like
Right.
that's not how we operate at all. So school and the world of work becomes very difficult for us because it's not
Right.
designed for how we work in the world. And so then it looks like we have all of these deficits because
Right.
we're judged against a standard that wasn't meant for us. And I like to say that that world, it seems to me, like the world of industrial capitalism, is not really good for neurotypical people either.
Right.
You know, but they can survive it, or at least most of them can survive it better than we can. Uh,
Right.
so yeah. In terms of time, I think that the way that our world, the Western industrial capitalist world, thinks about time as a very linear thing, right? As
Hmm.
very like from point A to point B. And if you think about like what we talk about executive function, this concept of executive function,
Right.
we in the neurodivergent community often think of that as simply like, oh, I have bad executive function because I lose my keys or I miss appointments, like
Right.
all these like individual little sort of scatterbrained things. But if you
Hmm.
read the literature on executive function, the way that the theorists of it think of it is much more about um, is somebody able to get from point A to point B to like set a goal and then in a really focused, single-minded, undistracted, linear way achieve that goal. Like
Mm.
that's what's considered executive function.
That's
Like
really interesting.
yeah. Um,
Yeah,
and
I
nerd,
think most ADHD people, when they hear that, they do. They think about, I lose my keys all the time. I can't find my wallet, and that is what they think of.
those are the little things that get in the way of,
Right.
or seem to get in the way, right, of us working in this really blindered, focused, undistracted way.
Yeah.
Um, and I think in this like contemporary Western society, there's this idea, and it's certainly in the world of work and in the world of school, that's the only way available to do
Right.
your work.
That's the problem. Right. Yeah.
Right. But that's not how artists work. That's not how designers work. Artists and designers work very iteratively, where you try things out, and failure isn't really failure; it's just data. Like, but it
Right.
might send you off in an entirely different direction. So it becomes much more sort of loopy and spiraling the
Right.
ways you work in time,
Right.
which looks like failure if you judge it against this very linear idea of time.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a problem.
Yes. Well, I've always said that I feel like I always had a hypertext mind. It like instead of being in a linear way, and I can go down linear, I know how to do that. But if I'm just left to my own devices, I'm going to have a very hypertext. One thing will lead to another thing, lead to another thing. And so it's more of a web or a
Yes.
network. And,
Yes.
ironically, the entire internet is based on that mathematical model of networking. And, it's probably a bunch of ADHD people invented
Yep.
that approach to things, but that doesn't necessarily help when it comes to, having to deal with the linear aspects of modern existence.
Right.
That isn't really what is going to get you to decide that, I got to have a to-do list of tedious things that I'm going to be okay with,
Right. Right.
So, I think a lot of people talk about, that person needs to have kind of a mission, something that they're kind of excited about, something that will then drive those executive functioning skills. And
Absolutely.
so, tell us a little bit about the kinds of coaching that you, helped people with when they kind of came to you.
I would say that I didn't, like I said, I didn't even think of myself as a coach. People came to me and asked would I coach them. So it sort of emerged. The sort of niches that I work in have sort of emerged, but a couple of distinct ones I've worked with quite a few people who, like me, maybe like you, sort of came to understand our neurodivergence a little bit later in life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then all of a sudden, a whole bunch of things started to make sense in our lives. And then I think there's a whole process that people often go through of like grief and regret and feeling like, oh, if I'd only known sooner, or all
Yeah.
that time that I went through. And I do think that that sort of grieving is a stage that we need to go through. But I also think that we can get past that we can get past the feeling that we've wasted anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really believe in wasted time. I mean, I think that it's something that many of us feel when we first discover our neurodivergence. So one of the groups of people that I've supported is just sort of listening to, and I don't even call myself a coach, actually. I call myself a peer mentor because I'm not trained, certainly not as a therapist, but I'm not even trained. Like, there are accreditation courses you can take as a coach. I've done none of that. So
Right.
I'm really more like just somebody who may be a little bit further along in the journey than you are, and who can,
Right.
lend a sympathetic ear. And then I have found that in my coaching and in my community in general, that some of the metaphors that I've offered, like time is a spiral or a millrace,
Right.
and those kinds of things have been really helpful to people. And then the
Yeah.
other group of people that I have worked with are students, and I love working with students and young
Right.
people. And that's where, like, these kids, like, where the rubber hits the road, like you were saying, like somebody has a master's thesis that's due in 3 months,
Right.
and they're freaking out and they don't know how to get it done. And so
Right.
I'm pretty good at helping people kind of reverse engineer and set deadlines for themselves, and supporting them and all of that as well.
Well, those are all really great things, that start to help people. I know, just the idea that you don't have this kind of training. I think in a lot of ways, I've certainly found as I help other people who have, kind of these issues, is that a lot of people who don't have these issues don't really know how to go about helping someone, because the very thing that they think is easy to do, it's always one of those things where, yes, I know that I should be doing that, but that's what the problem is. I can't do it. So I think it's really important that people who, have this brain type help the other people who have that brain type to, I always say, not working against yourself, but working with yourself,
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
stop beating yourself up, stop feeling like, that, you need to just, I know even with my son, he just wants to flip that switch and turn over into this other kind of mind that would then allow him to do all this kind of stuff. And it's really hard when you've just been conditioned. I think we posted a nice thing on the group where it said, "Have you been conditioned to consider yourself lazy because you don't do that?" And I think that there are a lot of that conditioning is, and we'll say parents who want to see their children successful, kind of shame them and all of that kind of stuff. So that starts to, and for me, that's why yoga has been so helpful, because that has given me a way to step out of these paradigms and begin to understand my own mind, how I really work, what's different, what's the same, where the trauma response is coming in, all of those kind of things. So I think one of the things you posted about recently was rest.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the importance to rest to all this.
Okay, I'd love to talk about that. And then I actually would like to loop back to yoga and shame and trauma, because I do think that it's connected.
Great.
I think that one of the characteristics of a neurodivergent mind, as I said, we're just being bombarded by sensation and ideas, and there's just, our brains are just going often. Like, there's just so much going on, synapses firing all over the place. And like, it can feel like you're just racing, right? But you're just sort of racing in place. You're not getting anything done.
Right.
And you're finding it hard to start things. You're finding it hard, certainly, to work in a linear way, which is how you're expected to work. There's like a lot of issue with abandoned projects and a lot of shame around that for a lot of neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
So I think that the impulse is to think, I've got to work harder, I've got to work faster, right? Because I'm not accomplishing them enough, I'm not being productive enough. Um, and I have all this stuff inside of me that I want to get out. So obviously the solution to that must be, it just seems sensible that I should work harder and faster.
Right.
But I think somewhat counterintuitively, the actual answer is that we have to slow down.
Right.
Because we're already going so fast inside.
Right.
That the only way that we're going to actually get any of that out effectively is by slowing it down.
Right.
The metaphor that somebody in my community, and I always wish I could remember who it was so I could give them credit, but that they offered me was that of and the reason it probably resonates for me is because my father is a fine woodworker. But if you think of a fine woodworker working with a beautiful piece of wood and these like really precise tools, right? They're always very slow and deliberate.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have to be. You can't work fast.
Right.
You're going to ruin your beautiful piece of wood. You're going to make a mistake. And that doesn't make that what they're doing any less complex or interesting or nuanced. It just requires slowness.
Yeah.
Do it. And I have found that when I am having that racing feeling of all these ideas tumbling inside myself,
yeah,
I can even just deliberately slow my body.
Yeah.
Like literally, like pick up my glass slowly.
Interesting. Yeah.
Slowly put it back down. Whatever it is I'm doing, just physically slow my body down. And that will also calm my mind. Because I do think it's like sort of at the heart of yoga, right? Is that connection between mind and body.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I just want to say one more thing. I think there's another piece of it too, though, which is getting back to what you were saying, which is that intentionally or unintentionally, and I think often it's unintentionally, we have been shamed.
Right.
From a very early age about all the things that we can't do or we don't do right or that we don't do well by our families, by our schools, by our jobs.
Right.
And just in a wash in a sea of shame. And shame is really a kind of trauma.
Yes.
It's the sense that there's something. Brene Brown distinguishes between guilt and shame by saying that guilt is the feeling that we've done something wrong, which you can fix. You can make amends, you can do it right. But shame is the sense that we are wrong. There's something intrinsically, fundamentally wrong with us. There's nothing good that can come of that, and it is a real trauma. So I think it's a trauma that's debilitating.
Right.
Stored as you probably know, and probably your community knows, that trauma gets stored in our bodies.
Absolutely, yeah.
That one of the ways that we can work that out is through intentional, contemplative, meditative practices like meditation and yoga and prayer and all sorts of things.
All of those things, yeah. And it's a very interesting thing about shame. I know, Brene Brown has kind of brought it to everybody's attention, this kind of feeling of shame. And when you think about, a dog that's ashamed, their tail goes between their legs. That happens in the human body. And that we might call it the chakra, we might call it the root chakra. That chakra can become, and it isn't on truly the physical plane. I mean, certainly there are the biophysical components of it, but there is also the mental, emotional components of it that, like you say, it's getting stored in a certain place. And when you begin to acknowledge, oh, I see that, that's where it's happening. It's happening. I can feel it right there. You can get a little bit of distance from it, and you can start to get that healing around it. And I think because we'll call them neurodiverse people, like you're saying, they're so receivers, they have highly sensitive nervous systems. So we're talking about not only all these labels, but also now HSP, highly sensitive people. I mean, the whole thing is, there are people with nervous systems that are, very like sensitive devices.
Right.
And that can be a really great thing when it comes to receiving input and energy from, we'll say, the universe or the cosmos, whatever. But it can be really negative because you can have these emotions get stored in your body and really be a trauma response or be a shame response or any of those kind of things.
Exactly.
And so we have to learn the techniques that
Yeah.
help us to, kind of manage it better. It's not like it changes completely. You are that way. You're going to be that way.
Right. But I think that you can heal from shame,
Yes.
and then you can also, as you were saying, start to recognize shame when it's happening to you. Like, this
Right.
is one of the things that I talked about my individual coaching, but in my groups, I talk a lot about shame and how to recognize it. Because I think that often we don't even know what is
Yeah.
shame versus anxiety or
Yeah.
depression or fear. Like, those things get all jumbled up together. And, anxiety, depression, fear, sadness, envy, all of those emotions that might be negative emotions, they're human emotions. We don't want
Right.
to eliminate those. But shame, there's literally not a single, like all the research says, there's not a single good thing that comes of shame. There's
Right.
only bad things that come of shame. And so
Yeah.
we do want to try to eliminate it.
Yeah.
And so we want to try to heal from the wounds of our past shames. And we also want to learn how to recognize it on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
So that we can disrupt it as fast as possible.
Yes.
And the way that we can do that is one of the many ways that we can do that is to learn how it shows up in our bodies.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
To distinguish it from these other kinds of emotions and the ways that they show up in our bodies. And then to work it out through our bodies as well.
And all those other emotions, as well as shame, can be dealt with, held, and and I think that's why I have turned this group into, mellow your mind, movement, meditation, and mindfulness, because I think a lot of people come to yoga with the idea of it being for fitness, which of course it is, and
Right.
of course all these things are related. There's no
Right.
body, mind, and spirit are all related. So of course they're the same. You could go to a fitness class and have a mental connection,
Right.
but by taking the time to understand in our bodies where all these things are coming from, you actually are doing what the yogis tell you you're supposed to be doing, which is cleaning the mirror, seeing yourself for who you really are. You're cleansing that mirror, and the more you see yourself for who you really are, the less those emotions can control you. And I think that is the great gift of yoga, is it allows you to see when these things are coming up. And then when they're coming up, create a little distance. And when you create a little distance, letting them go, that starts to clean the mirror more and more. And then pretty soon you're like, oh, that's not really me. I'm more than all of that. And so I think that's the healing approach for all the people that are, trying to struggle with all these things, aside from the practical techniques that they can do.
Right.
All of those kind of things. So
I'm really glad to hear you say, I mean, I agree that yoga can be used as a fitness practice for sure. And I don't want to disparage it in that way, but I also think that we as a culture are so obsessed with fitness and diet culture and fat shaming and body shaming, and that I think a lot of people believe that they can't do yoga, a practice like yoga, because they don't have the right kind of body to do that practice.
Absolutely.
Like, you can do yoga with barely moving your body. Like, it doesn't
barely moving,
and that I think that sort of decoupling it a little bit, at least from fitness, and putting the emphasis on the mindfulness practice of it. Which for many is also a spiritual practice. It doesn't have to be, but it can be also that. I think is really a gift that you're giving to artists and neurodivergent people, because I think a lot of those people have been shamed. And I mean, we all live at all kinds of intersections, and the neurodivergence isn't the only condition or trait or identity that we have that we're shamed for.
Absolutely.
Often we feel many of us, for various reasons, related to gender or size or ability,
Body type.
body type, feel very alienated from our bodies.
Yeah, I think
And
that's
that's just yet another level of, like, this whole mind. I mean, I know I'm just preaching to the converted here, but this whole mind body split is a completely false.
yeah,
Our neurology is our body is our neurology. Like,
right.
right, there isn't such a thing as saying, like, we talk in the neurodivergent world, we talk a lot about our brains. I have this sort of a
Right.
brain, that's
Yeah.
this brain, but like our brain is part of our body.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's
Yeah.
no distinction. And so I just think that like the work that you're doing is just a real gift to the neurodivergent.
Well, that's great, and I really appreciate the work you're doing, which I think brings a lot of awareness to the what's going on and how people can re-perceive their position in the world and stop blaming themselves and see themselves in a new light, which then can lead to healing and transformation. And then the very things that are so hard and frustrating and difficult for them can be turned around, and then they can be more connected to themselves and the world, and be more, in the end it's sort of about this success thing. Like, you want to be successful in the world, and in whatever way that is. Right. Usually it means you're independent, you're paying for your way, you're doing whatever it is that makes you feel that you aren't at the mercy of everyone else. You're not the victim. And right. I think that's a lot of it. We're trying to get away from being victimized by the world and being able to, really feel like you're empowered. These are all cliches and words that people are using, but it is actually possible, to do all that. Well, just for, so we don't go on and on, which I think probably could do for several hours, but I think we kind of think alike about a lot of this stuff. Tell us a little bit about, your new program that you're starting up, and, the kinds of things that you want to do there.
Okay, thanks for bringing that up. I have come, this is like sort of piggybacking on what you were just saying. I have really come to believe that peer support, the community, is where we'll draw our strength. Like, I mean, I think that there's sort of this myth of the individual and pull yourself up from your bootstraps.
Right.
There's something shameful about not being completely independent and autonomous and self-sufficient. And I think that those are sort of harmful American myths. And that what we really need is each other and community and support. That, some of us can become completely independent. Some of us won't be able to.
Right.
That's all okay. So a sort of framework has emerged from my work. I didn't set out to do this, but that framework involves investigating and disrupting shame, and then also design thinking, which is another, I won't go off on design thinking, but it's sort of the antithesis of executive function. If executive function is like this linear, focused, undistracted kind of process, design thinking is a more iterative, spiraling kind of process that many artists and neurodivergent people engage in.
Right.
And there's some other components as well, but peer support is really the one that that brings them all together. Like, I really think that we just need each other. Many of us have difficulties with friendships and being part of communities because we're weird, we're quirky, we don't quite always get all of the social cues, So we need each other. So I'm about to launch a membership site on a platform called Mighty Networks, where people can come together, and it's not just for neurodivergent artists or people who consider themselves artists, but that's sort of my main focus. But in general, I just think that we all are designers, and that we all have the capacity to design new lives in creative ways. And so in that way, I think we are all artists, even if our art is our life.
Right.
Not a painting or a song or whatever.
Right.
So So yeah, I'm gonna be launching this membership site where I hope that we could find each other and support each other, and I'll be offering some workshops inside of that site. And I think that maybe we're gonna put a link, I don't know, in the comments.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the comments or just in the group and on the page. So yeah, so people can find you if they want to.
A wait list. Who will be the first to know when I decide to launch this? So that's all that you're doing, is getting on a wait list to know about the launch, which is, I think, going to happen. I keep putting it off because we were talking about rest. Like I have found that if I allow myself to rest, if I sort of lean into my need for rest,
Yeah,
that I come out of it way faster and into a more
absolutely
creative and productive place than if I resist my need to rest. So it's sort of, I had planned on launching this site a couple of weeks ago, and then I realized I needed some time off this summer after a really busy first half of the year. So I keep sort of putting it off, but it is going to happen really soon.
Well, that's great. And, just back to the whole idea of rest, I mean, I think that one of the greatest gifts that yoga has given me, or any of these practices, is, I think there is a way in which that brain type does need to just kind of chill. And, it's not always convenient to take a nap, or it's not always convenient, but in the middle of the day, you can just stop and do a restorative yoga posture or something. And it has an amazing effect on doing exactly what you're talking about, so that it paces it up where you're not in that hyperdrive, all day long for months on end, and finally you crash. It kind of manages the crash, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, the last thing I'm going to ask you, and I might be putting you on the spot, so if I am, I forgot to tell you ahead of time that I was going to ask this question, but I like to ask the people that I'm interviewing if they have a favorite quote or something that has been inspirational to them, or some inspiring thing that kind of helps you to keep connected to what it is that you care about and what you're doing.
Yeah, that's great. I probably would have come up with something a little different if I'm not doing it off the cuff. Like I would have done a bunch of research.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's another way. Why not to do it?
Right. No, that's fair enough. I get that. The first thing that comes to mind, of many things that could come to mind, is the novelist George Eliot, George Eliot was the pen name for a woman named Marianne Evans, and she wrote in the late 1800s, the late 19th century. She was British. She was a remarkable woman, in many ways, so ahead of her time. And it's not even sure that she actually said it, but it's attributed to her. She says, "It's never too late to be who you were meant to be, or to be." I can't even get it. But basically, the gist of it, I'm going to look it up. But the gist of it is that it's never too late to be.
Right, it's never too late. I have read that quote before, and I love it. It's a great quote. I think it's
exactly.
You'll find it.
But I think that to be what you might have been, it's never too late to be what you might have been.
Right.
And I was talking earlier about how I don't believe in wasted time, although I do completely understand why so many of us often feel like we've wasted a lot of our lives. But I find that as I get older, and this is part of that whole spiral way of looking at life, that I just keep sort of spiraling back into my past and scooping up things that I did before that felt like failures, that felt like abandonments, that felt like just a big waste of my time. You know, like so many professions that I didn't follow through on, and relationships and all the rest of it. It all has become useful in my life. It's like buried treasure that I get to go and mine, and is now the raw material of my life.
Yes, I love it. And I also like to think that, we wouldn't be sitting here having this cool conversation if all that other stuff hadn't happened to put us here right now.
Things that happened to me,
brought
me to this.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was hard.
Right.
But it all brought me to this. And I was diagnosed with ADHD, or I wasn't actually. I was sort of like you. I wasn't officially diagnosed, but
Right.
I convinced my psychiatrist who I was seeing for other reasons to treat me as though
Right.
I was diagnosed at 51, and I had just left a 29-year marriage um, at the age of 50, and like kind of turned my life upside down and shook really hard, and everything fell out. I like completely started over at age 50,
Yeah.
every day. Um, like basically carrying forward only my children.
Yeah.
and and it's possible. It's just
Yeah, it's possible. And I think that's such an important message, especially for young people, because I know I hear a lot of young people like, I'm almost 30 and, I'm behind, that whole I'm behind thing. And, it's like, you don't really realize that there is no behind, you're just kind of,
that's still that notion of like linear success, that like
near
it's like
success.
productivity and efficiency
Yeah.
and materialism and all of that. And so I think that there's great joys in growing older as a neurodivergent person. I think
It's true.
you have perspective,
Yeah,
I
perspective.
also think that everybody should hang out with young people, because
It's
young
true.
people are just amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, most of the people I hang out with, most of my friends are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, even though I'm almost 56. And uh, I just am. I just think that young people are so remarkable. I think that
Absolutely.
they're going to save the world. Um,
Well,
my
we
job
got,
is not to
they're,
save
gonna-
the world, but we
they're
do.
going to save the world, but we have to, they're also under a lot of stress right now. There's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
much
yeah.
anxiety, so
Absolutely.
much suicide rates, so much. And I just think, as the world gets tighter and tighter, the very creativity that they're bringing to all of us
Yeah,
in the way to really do that work to save the world,
yeah,
we need to set them free a little bit,
yeah,
because
absolutely.
they're feeling a tight squeeze right now,
Yeah,
and it just breaks your heart to watch young people grow up as these awesome people, and then they hit the wall of
yeah,
all of this other stuff,
yeah.
and they don't really have the tools to kind of to work it all
I
out.
I do think that if you want to succeed as a neurodivergent person, you have to do it on your own terms.
You have to do it on your own
You
terms.
can't succeed on the terms of the world, because the world wasn't designed for you.
No, absolutely. I completely
If you're
agree.
an artist, if you're a creative person, if you're somebody who thinks differently, you have to like define your own success, and that's hard because
It's
often
hard.
you're
It's very, very hard.
the
And
world is
and
looking
yeah,
at you, and and I get all that. Believe me.
yeah. And I always say, like, to a kid, or don't get on the elevator with everybody else, because you're going to be smushed to the back. Take the stairs. You're gonna
That's why I believe so much in peer support, that we need to find each other, because we
yeah,
are like we're all different in our own quirky ways, but we have some things in common. Some
yeah,
of the things that are difficult, some of the creative impulses, some of the you know like just the ways that we're weird and quirky. We
yeah.
all have in common, and it's just so comforting to be in community with
It
other
really
people
is.
who are like you.
Yeah,
Like talk about something that has been a source of shame in your life and have everybody in the room nodding their head
yeah,
and understanding. It's just a really powerful experience. So
yeah.
like that would be the one piece of advice that I have for all neurodivergent people,
Yeah.
ones, is to find your people,
Find your people. Yeah,
find each other.
yeah. Well, Marta, this has been such a treat, and as great, two neurodiverse people, we could probably go on for a long, long time having this wonderful conversation. But we won't. We
Yeah.
won't challenge our listeners to go on with us. But I just have so enjoyed talking to you, and I hope everybody out there. I still have such a struggle trying to get this to work well in Facebook, so I didn't ask anybody for comments. If you're listening, please throw some comments into the comment field. Let us know what you think, and all that kind of stuff. One day I'll be able to do it all, but it's enough just to be able to get Marta here and get us live. So
Technology is like is our savior and also the bane of our existence.
it really is.
I'm not really on Facebook in this capacity.
Right.
But I'm on Instagram as at neurodivergent. No, Divergent Design Studios.
Great. Yes.
So if anybody would like to follow my work there, And then we'll throw a link where you can get on my email newsletter as well.
Yeah, we'll throw all kinds of links in. I love your Instagram feed. It really always is inspiring and incredibly creative. I don't know how you come up with all that great artwork. It's fabulous. So it's a lot of fun. All right. Thanks, Marta. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I'm going to end the broadcast.